because Vice President Wang Bo cannot come here because of some other urgent business to attend. Originally, he planned to come here to talk to us. So he did send me a speech. So I'll read it in Chinese because it's drafted in Chinese. 各位嘉宾、老师
Distinguished guests, fellow faculty members, students, friends, good evening. And a good morning to our friends from the US side. I'm delighted to be here for the 2020 Sandy Berger Memorial Fellowship Awards ceremony. On behalf of Peking University, I would like to extend my warmest congratulations to the first batch of the Berger Memorial Fellowship winners and express my heartfelt gratitude to all the friends who care about and support Peking University's development and facilitate people-to-people exchange between China and the US. At the behest of Mrs. Susan Berger, widow of former US National Security Advisor Samuel Richard Sandy Berger, Madame Julia Chang Bloch, former US Ambassador to Nepal and President of US-China Education Trust, proposed the establishment of the Sandy Berger Memorial Fellowship at Peking University School of International Studies. The fellowship aims to promote youth, cultural, and educational exchanges between China and the US, boost bilateral academic exchanges, and lay a solid societal foundation for China-US people-to-people exchanges and bilateral relationship development. In October last year, Peking University held a series of activities to launch the Berger Memorial Fellowship and enable the fellowship to take root in Peking University. In February this year, the call for application for the Berger Fellowship attracted many students to apply, and eventually 4 students stood out and became the winners. People-to-people exchanges are a long-term endeavor and are essential to the long-term development of China-US relations. In the summer of 1998, Mr. Berger visited Peking University and met with students in the dormitory. That visit left an indelible mark in the history of PKU's foreign exchange program and sowed a seed of China-US friendship at PKU. Today, the Berger Memorial Fellowship is not only an inheritance of Mr. Berger's spirit of promoting people-to-people exchange between China and the US, but also a fruitful harvest from the seeds sown 20 years ago. President Xi Jinping had mentioned in his reply letter to the students of Niles North High School in Illinois that the younger generation is the future of Sino-US friendship. I hope you will cherish your time and study hard and contribute to the friendship between the Chinese and American people. We also have high hopes for the Peking University students who are members of the young generation carrying the future of China-US relations. We hope that the young people of both countries will be far-sighted, shoulder their responsibilities and missions, learn from the history of the relationship between the two countries, take over the torch of promoting China-US friendship from your predecessors, and work together to open up even better prospects for the future of the relationship between our countries. We hope that the young people of both countries will practice in conformity with truth and moral beliefs, and that you will use your creativity and wisdom to carry out a variety of exchange activities, enhance mutual understanding, and deepen mutual knowledge, and become the most active force in people-to-people exchanges between our two countries. We hope that the young people of the two countries will keep pace with the times, adopt a more open and tolerant attitude, take an objective and rational view of China-US relations, learn from each other's strengths and weaknesses on the basis of mutual respect, and promote the development of a China-US relationship based on coordination, cooperation, and stability. Finally, I would like to thank all the friends for your commitment to China-US friendship and exchange, and congratulate the fellowship winners once again. Thank you very much.
Okay, this is Vice President Wang Bo's speech. He sends his greetings and congratulations.
Thank you, Professor Jia, for reading Vice President Wang Bo's speech. Next, according to our agenda, it is my honor to invite Mr. Susan Berger to deliver her remarks. Susan, please.
Thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction and that wonderful description of Sandy's relationships with our program. On behalf of all of the Berger family, my kids, Debbie, Sarah, and Alex, their spouses, Nick, Sonny, and Susan, and all 7 of our grandchildren, whom I will not name, I first wish to thank the leaders and tireless staff members of Peking University, the School of International Studies, and the U.S.-China Education Trust for the creation of this fellowship in Sandy's memory. It's been deeply meaningful to us as a family and to me personally. I also wish to extend on behalf of our family sincere congratulations to the 4 inaugural recipients of the Sandy Berger Memorial Fellowship. Sandy had so many passions in his life, but 2 that he held close to his heart were education and the U.S.-China relationship. So this fellowship is such an appropriate and enduring way to honor his mentorship. Sandy dedicated most of his life to helping a good portion of his life to helping students find their path, from his time as an undergraduate at Cornell, where we met, through his career in public service, and after he left government, he was still continuing to deeply honor mentorship. And it's more important now than ever that this fellowship promotes your work studying the U.S.-China relationship. Sandy spent his entire career focused on many areas around the globe, but he had a special affinity for building the strategic bond between our 2 countries. In his years in the government, he promoted enhanced relations on economic and political fronts and in the private sector, both during his years as an international trade attorney and then later founding and leading the Albright Stonebridge Group. He worked tirelessly to promote opportunities for companies, universities, and nonprofits to expand their presence in China and to deepen the understanding between the governments, companies, and peoples of the United States and China. Whenever Sandy returned from a trip to China, he had wonderful stories to share about how engaged he was in official and unofficial meetings, the warm hospitality and delicious meals he was always treated to by his local hosts, and of course, the energy he always felt being in China, where cityscapes were always changing and people's aspirations were always expanding. What inspired Sandy the most during his travel to China was the incredible intellect of his interlocutors and the shared view that despite the differences, when US and China effectively cooperate, our 2 countries can achieve great things. Sandy would be delighted to hear about the work you 4 scholars will be pursuing as Berger Fellows. And throughout your work, he would be encouraged to know that there is a new generation of stewards dedicated to promoting our bilateral relationship. Thank you for carrying the torch of his efforts and honoring his memory. Congratulations again, fellowship winners, and thank you again to Peking University, the School of International Studies, and U.S.-China Education Trust for creating this incredibly important platform for the next generation of scholars focused on the all-important China-U.S. relationship. Sandy's memory is so well honored throughout your work.
Thank you, Susan, for giving us such a warm speech. I just wanted to add to your remarks that many years ago, I had the fortune of accompanying Professor Wang Jisi to visit the United States, and we had a meeting with Sandy. And I still remember he was very patient and very warm to a young and junior scholar like myself. And we had a very good discussion, excellent discussion about U.S.-China relations. So that was a very warm and fond memory of mine for him. So I just want to mention that as well.
Thank you for sharing that. He particularly enjoyed those meetings.
Thank you, Susan. Next, it's my honor to invite Ambassador Julia Chang Block, President of the U.S.-China Education Trust, to deliver her remarks. Julia, please.
Thank you, Won-Dong. Good morning and good evening, everyone. We are delighted to be here with you on this very special day to celebrate the inaugural cohort of the Sandy Berger Memorial Fellows. This time last year, we were gathered on the campus of Peking University to launch this fellowship and commemorate the 40th anniversary of the normalization of U.S.-China relations. What a difference a year makes. The coronavirus pandemic has ravaged the world, and we are headed for the blackest period in U.S.-China relations. Day by day, blow by blow, the United States and China are demolishing decades of political, economic, social, and educational engagement, intensifying a cycle of confrontation shaped by tit-for-tat retaliatory moves that are pushing the most important bilateral relationship in the 21st century to the point of no return. The good news is that we're not yet over the precipice. Sandy Berger Fellows, you are our hope. You are a point of light in these dark times. You have been selected for your excellence, potential, and passion for international studies and U.S.-China relations. You have impressed us with your ability and desire to deepen your knowledge about the U.S. to make the relationship better. You are the best and brightest that PKU School of International Studies has to offer. We know that you will do credit to the prestige of Sandy Berger Fellows, as well as to his lifelong work for constructive engagement with China. The U.S.-China Education Trust, you said, is proud to be associated with this fellowship and with Peking University's School of International Studies. I might add, renowned School of International Studies, which hosts this fellowship. We at USET have a deep commitment to our mission to nurture the next generation of leaders in U.S.-China relations. USET really began on the campus of Peking University when in 1998, PKU invited me to help revive its American Studies Center in celebration of its centennial. Just think, 2 of the fellows were not yet born. Now, Professor Wang Jishu is with us today. My friend, I wonder if you still remember our conversation now more than 20 years ago, when I challenged the conventional wisdom that the Chinese understood America better than Americans understood China. I don't remember exactly the outcome of that conversation. It's so long ago. But I still remember that I was surprised to find that Peking University, long known as the Harvard of China, did not offer degree programs either in American studies or area studies about the US. I found that most Chinese America experts, of course, excepting those around the table today, by and large understood America from a very narrow perspective, that of US-China relations. And most knew very little about American domestic politics, economics, or culture. Most of the American experts on China, however, most of them studied their entire lives about China, although most of them would never be able to match their counterparts in facility with each other's language. The Berger Fellowships will give the fellows an opportunity to dig deeper into their study and research of the US in the hopes of building greater understanding and a more constructive US-China relationship. Looking at US-China relations today, my generation does not get high marks. The future of US-China relations lies with the younger generation. Berger Fellows, it is your generation, both in China and the US, who needs to pick up the mantle to regenerate this all-important relationship, to rebuild mutual trust in the study that we share, in the technologies that we create, and the business that we do together. World peace and prosperity will depend on it. Let me conclude by saying that when Sandy Berger left the world, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright mourned the death of her colleague by saying, "Our country is stronger because of Sandy's deep and abiding commitment to public service. And there are countless people whose lives he changed for the better. I am certainly one of them. I hope the Sandy Berger Fellowship will change your lives and US-China relations for the better. Good luck to you all, and thank you."
Thank you. Thank you, Julia, for giving such a warm encouragement to this cohort of the Berger Fellowship fellows, and I'm sure they will be very much encouraged by that. Thank you, Julia. Next, it is my honor to invite Professor Tang Shiqi, Dean of School of International Studies at Peking University, to deliver his remarks. 唐老师。
谢谢王董 ，Thank you 王董。尊敬的张志
Thank you,
祥
Wang Dong. Distinguished Ambassador John Block, distinguished Mrs. Susan Berger, dear guests and experts. Good morning, good evening. First of all, on behalf of the School of International Studies at Peking University, I would like to extend a warm welcome and thanks to our guests, especially our American friends who are attending this virtual awards ceremony. People-to-people exchanges between China and the US are a long-term undertaking that has impacts on the future of US-China relations and the well-being of the two peoples. This particularly needs the participation of the young people of both countries. And the School of International Studies at Peking University has a long-standing mission to identify and cultivate young scholars with an educational background in international studies, the ability to communicate across national borders and cultures, a sense of responsibility for mankind, and a global outlook. Last October, Peking University and the US-China Education Trust, entrusted by Mrs. Susan Berger, co-sponsored the establishment of the Sandy Berger Memorial Fellowship at the School of International Studies of PKU. And out of 16 applicants, 4 winners were selected. Today, we are holding this awards ceremony for the young winners to congratulate them and to express our hope that they will carry on the spirit of Mr. Berger and other people of insight who have devoted themselves to China-US relationship, exchange and cooperation, and to enhance mutual understanding and exchanges between the two peoples. I also often tell my students that diplomacy and international relations are ultimately relations between cultures. From this perspective, to be a good diplomat and a researcher of international relations, one must have a deep understanding of both one's own culture and that of other countries. It is true that China and the US are different in many ways, but this should never be an obstacle to the two sides' ability to deal with common threats and challenges and to achieve prosperity and development. It is only on the basis of mutual understanding that we can discover where our real differences lie and find ways to resolve or manage them. And in the process, the other side's misunderstanding of us should not be a reason not to get to know and understand them better. Rather, we should do exactly the opposite. I think the Berger Fellowship and the cause of China-US people-to-people exchange is to pursue a high level of understanding, trust, and friendship between China and the US. I fully agree with Ambassador Julia Block that educational and cultural exchanges between the people of China and the US are the last and the most important pillar and cornerstone of the relationship between the two countries. and that when other aspects are hindered, people-to-people exchanges are even more important and must be continued. I believe that such efforts are also our hope for the development of a harmonious, cooperative, and stable China-US relationship. Last but not least, on behalf of the School of International Studies at Peking University, please allow me to express my high esteem and heartfelt gratitude to Mrs. Susan Berger and all friends who have contributed to China-US friendship. I also congratulate the fellowship winners and hope that you will spread the seed of mutual understanding between China and the US to more people so that it will continue to bear fruit in both countries. Thank you very much.
谢谢，非常感谢唐院长热情洋溢的讲话和对奖学金获奖者的热情鼓励。下面 ，Next, it is my honor to invite Ms. Zhao Ling, President of Peking University Education Foundation USA, to deliver her remarks. Ms. Zhao, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Wang. Dear Mrs. Berger, Ambassador Chang, and American guests and friends, good morning, good evening. Dean Tang, Professor Wang, Professor Jia, Professor Shi, and my colleagues and students at Peking University. It is my great pleasure and honor on behalf of Peking University Education Foundation, USA, to reiterate our deep appreciation to Ambassador Chang for setting up this special fellowship, Sandy Berger Memorial Fellowship. During this special time, it means a lot. Sharing the same mission and vision with Mr. Samuel Berger and the U.S.-China Education Trust, PKUEF USA is committed to promoting educational and people-to-people exchange between the U.S. and China. We believe collaboration on the academic side can lead a role model for how the countries should collaborate on the other issues. Also, I'd like to congratulate to our students, the fellowship winners. People always say, when we are with young people, we are with the future. So I hope our students not only do a good job in the study and the research on international relations and American studies, but let more Americans, especially American people, know about China and understand China, try to think in new ways. Finally, please allow me to show my respect and extend my thanks to Professor Wang Dong and his team at PKU School of International Studies, as well as our great counterpart, the U.S.-China Education Trust team. We couldn't have this wonderful award ceremony today without their unremitting efforts. With the goal of fostering better China-U.S. relations and understanding, I have no illusions that the road ahead of us will be easy, either for the short term or the long haul. But today we are working together, and I believe that we will meet the challenge with both humility and courage. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Sao, for your very warm encouragement. Really appreciate that. I have no doubt that we working together, we can bring more hope into U.S.-China relations. Next, 下面我很荣幸邀请北京大学国际关系学院党委副书记祝义博老师来宣读获奖名单。祝老师，请。
好的，各位嘉宾、各位老师、同学，大家好。
Distinguished guests, faculty members, students, greetings. First of all, I would like to thank Mrs. Susan Berger and the Berger family to establish the Berger Memorial Fellowship at Peking University to recognize young scholars at Peking University who are committed to promoting China-US relationship. And I think one of the original intentions of the people who established this fellowship is to enable people across the world to be able to appreciate each other's cultures and promote the bilateral relationship of our two countries. Now, and I think the winners this year deserve this honor tonight. This afternoon, I participated in another awards ceremony. Actually, I saw the familiar names of these 4 winners. Now I'm going to read the names of the 2020 Sandy Berger Memorial Fellowship winners. Fan Jiarui, 30-year PhD candidate in international politics. Li Shuaiyu, 30-year PhD candidate in international political economy. Ouyang Ruize, second-year master student in international organization and international public policy. Zhang Chengyang, 4th-year college student majoring in international politics. Congratulations. And again, I want to thank Mrs. Susan Berger and those who have worked for the launch and operation of this fellowship.
好，谢谢，
Professor Wang Dong.
非常感谢朱老师，那么也向4位获奖的同学再一次致以这个最热烈的祝贺我也提议，我说我们在进入下一个环节之前，为我们4位同学鼓一个掌
I propose that we give them these winners a big hand before we enter the next session.
Present their thinking on US-China relations, and then for each of the 4 students, we will have one very senior professor to comment on his or her presentation. So first of all, I would like to invite Fan Jiarui to make her presentation. Jiarui, please.
Okay, thank you, Professor Wang. 谢谢王老师。Dear Mrs. Susan Berger, dear professors and distinguished guests, good morning and good evening. It's my honor to speak here today. My name is Fan Jiarui. I am a doctoral student from School of International Studies at Peking University. Firstly, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to you all for providing me this fellowship. My generation has grown up in a period characterized by the better relationship between China and the United States year by year. Giving the credit to your generation's efforts, we, the youth, deeply admire you seniors. So I think this fellowship is not only an honor, but also a symbol of responsibility handed down to us, inspiring us to focus on our research for improving the 2 countries' relationship continually. So I value this opportunity to share my topic with you. Next slide, please. My presentation will be divided into 3 parts. First, topic. Secondly, my framework. And thirdly, my future plan. Next slide, please. I am interested in some important maritime transport passages, especially for international navigation straits. For example, the Malacca Strait. As IGCU's vision said, we should connecting people and understanding the world. The Malacca Strait is one of the embodiment. It is located in Southeast Asia, a key geographic position, connecting complex economic, secure, and cultural phenomena together. Being a world commercial and shipping channel, this strait relies on mutual understanding among the inside and outside related countries to establish and keep the common regional governance. So my research question is why the Malacca Strait with international traffic function can form an effective and stable regional governance after World War II, and what is it for the future? I think it is crucial to international transportation and trade security, valuing to promote globally. Next slide, please. So in my view, the 3 lateral countries have constructed the limited open cooperation mood among inside and outside countries. It is led by lateral states themselves and welcome the outside powers to join within certain limits. This is my innovative idea. I think this above-mentioned model relies on the linkage of state sovereignty, cooperation mechanism, and regional order. Meanwhile, this paper takes in consideration two indicators, the depth of management right and the breadth of internationalization to describe the degree of this management mood. Through it, the government of littoral states has been enriched and the degree of internationalization has been expanded. Next slide, please. So I hope to use this fellowship to do some field research. For example, visit United States or Singapore's research institutes to know the international navigation rules and ocean governance research trade and get acquaintance with their academic circles. Therefore, I can compare the thinking approaches among different countries. After that, I would like to report my research results in some academic discussion and try to build up my own academic network related to this topic. I think China, the United States, and Southeast Asia countries should strengthen communication, enhancing the effectiveness, constructiveness, and innovativeness of the Malacca Strait governance model and promote the connectivity of this maritime transport passage. Next slide, please. So to conclude, I hope I can make some positive contribution for China and the United States relationship through this academic research. I hope to shoulder the responsibility of our generation, which we take up from your generation, for the region, for the world, and for our common future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jiarui, for your excellent presentation. I do hope an excellent doctoral dissertation can also come out of your research. Next,
thank you.
Thank you. Next, it is my honor to invite Professor Wang Jisi, Professor of School International Studies and President of the Institute of International and Strategic Studies at Peking University, to comment on Jiarui's paper. Professor Wang.
Thank you very much, Professor Wang Dong. Thank you. Mrs. Susan Berger, Ambassador Julia Chang Brock, Ambassador Stapleton Roy, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good evening. I feel very honored and pleased to attend the 2020 Sandy Berger Fellowship Awards ceremony. First of all, I should thank the U.S.-China Education Trust and Peking University for holding this great event and for inviting me to speak. Second, I'm supposed to make comments on Fan Jiarui's presentation on the Malacca Strait. While I did read her paper and listen to her talk, I have to confess that I don't have enough knowledge about the Malacca Strait to make any critical comments. As you know, university professors, especially older ones like myself, are mostly generalists than they are specialists. Doctoral students like Fan Jiarui will have to study specific subjects before they are well established. So I simply congratulate her and wish her well in continuing the research. I would like to take this opportunity to express my great admiration for Dr. Sandy Berger. To me, Sandy was not only a great statesman and strategist, but also a respectful, learned man and a good listener. I first met Sandy on June 27, 1998, when he joined President Bill Clinton on a state visit to Beijing as the National Security Advisor. Sandy and I were seated at the same table during the long state dinner in the Great Hall of the People. We did not sit next to each other, but he offered me a chance to have an informal conversation when he learned that I was a researcher studying US-China relations and US foreign policy. He asked me a question that I did not expect. He said, "Who do you think are the best China scholars in the United States?" After some hesitation, I gave him the names of 4 specialists I thought were outstanding. One on China's domestic politics, one on foreign relations, one on the economy, and one on security and military affairs. At the moment, I didn't think it was a serious question, so I guess he just wanted to test me to see if I really knew something about China-US relations and American scholarship. However, a few weeks after this meeting, I had a surprising conversation with one of the 4 China specialists I mentioned to Sandy Berger. This American scholar told me happily that because of my recommendation, Berger had invited him to a policy briefing in Washington. He sounded proud of it and thanked me. I was amazed because I wondered how Sandy could remember a name I referred to so casually without writing it down. In any case, this showed his excellent memories and devotion to work. After Sandy departed from the White House, I met him several times, as Wang Dong mentioned, at conferences and in some private discussions on US foreign policy and China-US relations. He was curious and knowledgeable about Chinese politics, and I learned a lot from him. He did not write a memoir, but somebody recorded his memories about his relationship with President Clinton that were intriguing. Sandy, of course, said many good things about Clinton, but when he makes a comment on Clinton's weaknesses, he says, "When President Clinton asked me to be National Security Advisor, Clinton said, 'The first 4 years I drove you crazy by what I don't know. The next 4 years, I'm going to drive you crazy by what I think I know and I don't.'" In one of our private conversations, Sandy did tell me the same thing, but in some more detail. That is, Clinton used to ask Sandy to give him a book every week to read. But when Clinton thought he had obtained more knowledge and experiences, he did not listen to his advisors that often and that attentively. I wonder whether this pattern applies to other US presidents or national leaders of other countries when they have served the country for more than 4 years and get enough experiences to make decisions on their own. Sandy Berger engaged himself with China in the few highlighted and relatively smooth years of the bilateral relationship. And he made great contributions to the United States and to the strengthening of China-US ties. Today, we are faced with more obstacles, but with Sandy's spirit and perseverance, we should work harder together to maintain the bilateral educational exchanges and cooperation. Our hopes lie in the younger generations, in the students who are attending this ceremony. With that, let me conclude my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Wang, for sharing with us such precious memories with your interactions with Mr. Sandy Berger. That was, I think, quite an encouragement, especially for younger generations here today present at this ceremony. Next, I would like to invite Li Shuaiyu to make presentation. Shuaiyu, please.
Thank you, Professor Wang. And good morning, Ms. Berger and distinguished guest. I'm Li Shuaiyu, a PhD student from the School of International Studies at Peking University. First of all, I would like to thank Ms. Berger for citing the Sandy Berger Memorial Fellowship and U.S.-China Education Trust and Peking University for organizing this ceremony. A few years ago, when I was an undergraduate in the class of History of International Relations, I knew Mr. Berger's name as the National Security Advisor in Clinton's administration for the first time. I was attracted by Mr. Berger's course as a central figure and strategist in formulating the foreign policy of Clinton's administration, especially the engagement policy with China. At that time, I couldn't imagine later I was honored to be the Berger Memorial Fellowship winner in support of my studies in the American political economy. I will always be grateful for all about this. Next slide, please. As a student majoring in international and comparative political economy, I'm going to present a research design about how the accelerated globalization since the 1990s affected social cleavages and political adversarial structure in advanced industrial countries. The puzzle of this issue is why the social tension and discontent related to economic globalization was manifested in the US and caused the foreign economic policy under more pressure from protectionism. While other industrialized economies in East Asia could manage the discontent against the economic globalization. Next slide. The classical theories of political economy providing insights into the choice of the open economy elaborate how the benefits from globalization can overcome the protectionism and create stable economic interdependence. But they relatively ignore the political backlash may redirect this process or even overturn it. Next slide, please. In the political arena, the party competition and social mobilization in the US can provide political entrepreneurs with the space to operate on issues relating to the discontent with globalization and give them incentives to implement policies deviating from commitment to the open economy in order to gain the public support. However, in East Asian economies, the similar opportunities for political entrepreneurs may not exist. Next slide. So next, I will briefly introduce two researchers about American political economy under this project above, which I'm planning to carry on with the support of this fellowship. I have just finished writing the first research. The story dates back to the 1980s when facing the formidable economic challenges from Japan, a debate on whether US also need industrial policy happened. A well-known ending of this debate is that Reagan administration abandoned the idea of a national industrial policy of Japanese style. But an untold story of this debate is after that a new industrial policy paradigm started to develop, focusing on supporting the R&D process, accelerating commercialization, and facilitating the American company to keep their position in the high end of global value chain. The Obama administration's Manufacturing USA program is the typical one of US industrial policy. The puzzle is why the United States could, on the one hand, push the international economic and trade rules to strictly impose more constraints on traditional industrial policies since the 1980s, while at the same time gradually constructed a developmental network regime for implementing the industrial policy at home. Since the establishment of WTO, whether the strict WTO rules reduce the policy space of its member governments to intervene the market and promote economic development is under the heated debate. By collecting and analyzing all the 76 cases of US as respondent in WTO dispute settlement, I can find evidence to show the compatibility of US industrial policy with the WTO rules. This study also relates to the discussion about legitimacy and equality of global economic governance systems, since it is obvious that countries like US and China with more state capacity can get more leeway and policy space than others. How to balance the international coordination and national development is vital to the ongoing reform of global economic governance system. The implications of this research also respond to the negative effects of globalization in the US. The industrial policy paradigm of the United States almost ignored the production process in manufacturing and excluded the labor as the beneficiary of industrial policy, have caused a serious problem of deindustrialization and the sag of manufacturing in the past 20 years. Next slide, please. And next research is more about the domestic politics of the United States. This is an ongoing research, and the question and puzzle originate from the observation that since the 1990s, why the Democratic Party maintains the competitiveness in both presidential campaign and Congress election, but fails to promote the progressive agenda, where the GOP can consistently implement the neoliberal policies, including tax cut, deregulation, and welfare retrenchment during every Republican administration. In order to answer this question, I will focus on the party realignment since the 1980s in American politics, arguing that on the one hand, this process strengthened the Democratic Party's competitiveness in the election, but on the other hand, undermined its capacity to form a consistent policy paradigm. The constituencies of Democratic Party who are trying to channel the new issues relating to post-materialism and some so-called radical left issues into the mainstream party platform may undermine its capacity to form the alliance to promote the traditional progressive policies aiming at improving the welfare system and poverty reduction. This situation may in turn exacerbate the social cleavage along with the distributional effects of economic globalization in the United States. That's all about my presentation, and I'm looking forward to Professor Sonnenschein's comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Shai, for your excellent presentation. Next, it is my honor to invite Professor Tara Sonnenschein, who is Distinguished Fellow at the George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs, and formerly Under Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs in the United States. Professor Sonnenschein, please.
Well, good morning and good evening. Let me begin by congratulating the recipients of the Sandy Berger Award and to thank Julia Chen Block and Susan, my colleagues in China at the university, Ambassador Roy, and all of you for the opportunity to say a few words about the paper and to engage its author. I should mention that prior to joining the State Department, first in the early Clinton years, I had the honor of serving Sandy Berger in his post as National Security Advisor and got to know his family and him very well. And so this is a particularly meaningful and emotional ceremony. I then went on to the United States Institute of Peace, where I was the deputy to Richard Solomon, a man of great intellect about US-China. And I can remember Ambassador Solomon and Mr. Berger being in my home and feeling like a small plant amongst large trees of intellect and wisdom in the forest. And at the US State Department, my responsibilities included educational exchange and cultural exchange, and had the chance to be in Beijing under Secretary Clinton. So all of this has come together with Julia's help for me to be in a position now to be able to offer some commentary. So I would begin first with a question for Lee, and that is, how does one translate the word globalization into Chinese? What is the term globalization? How is it used in China?
You mean the Chinese pronunciation of globalization? 全球化, 全球化.
So I ask this question because I want our student and all of our students to understand that we live in a time where words are very freighted and weighted. We attach enormous meaning to words like globalization in the United States. It conjures up certain images on one side and the other. And the same with many words, the concept of an open economy, the concept of trade. So it will be incumbent upon you to think about the cultural baggage, if you will, as you use these terms, how they resonate and are animated within both societies. I think it's important for me as a career advisor at George Washington to also ask how, as a PhD candidate with this enormous knowledge, what you hope to do. Is it to teach, to publish, to do public service, so that I'm always thinking of the person behind the paper. I would love to know the career aspirations for the author.
Oh, actually, after the graduation, I think I would like to find a faculty job in some universities in China to carry on my research career, I think.
And would you see your research and teaching focused more on politics or economics? Because I heard both threads woven beautifully in your excellent presentation.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor. I think as a student of major in the international political economy and comparative political economy, usually our research are carried on try to inquire the interactions between the political factors and economic factors. And of course, as a student of political science, we will focus on the political factors, I think.
And what I liked very much and what I congratulate you for is your choice of 4 countries. And I wonder how you decided on these 4 to be in the group.
I think this is originated from the framework of the varieties of capitalism that is developed by 2 prominent American scholars called Peter Hoare and Sotkis. I think under that they divided all the advanced industrial societies into 2 categories, as the United States and England as the liberal market economy, and Germany and Japan as the coordinated market economy. So I think I choose these 4 countries. They can represent the most advanced industrial societies, but also they face the similar problems like the outsourcing in the overseas, like the decline of the manufacturing. But their policies to react to this is quite different. And also, mostly I choose Germany as an example is to want to make this as a control group, since I think the European countries after the 1980s, their international environment is haven't changed so much compared with that the economies in the North America and East Asia. So that's the basic reason I choose.
Excellent. As you probably will know, you'll have to do some updating on these various countries with the change in leadership in Japan. It's going to be interesting whether so-called Abe economics will continue, certainly starting this evening. And there'll be a discussion between 2 presidential candidates, and I can assure you that China will be discussed and that we will be hearing very different partisan approaches to China. And the last thing I would say, I don't know if you have thought about the impact of COVID and the global health on your paradigm, if you will. And I love the word puzzle because I do think we're all in a international puzzle.
Oh, sorry. So far, I haven't incorporated the issues related to the COVID-19 into my research framework. But actually, I think also from the framework of varieties of capitalism, I think the different countries' policy towards this pandemic can also relate it to their characteristics of their political and economic institutions. And also, I would like to thank you for your advice about the change in situations in the Japan politics. When I was an exchange student in Waseda University, I started to develop my interest in the Japanese political economy, and I also have already conducted some research about our economics. Yeah.
Good. I'm not surprised. You've done amazing things already. Well, I would just like to, again, congratulate you and to say you've opened what we like to call Pandora's box in a good way, a panoply of issues, puzzles, mysteries, and a very dynamic area of the world. And so I wish you success with your work and look forward to reading your final work. And thank you for the honor of meeting you today.
Thank you so much, Professor Sonnenschein.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Sonnenschein, for your encouragement and your excellent comments on Li Shuaiyu's presentation. Next, I would like to invite Ouyang Ruizhe to make his presentation. Ouyang, please.
Thank you. Good evening, good morning to all of you, and good afternoon to myself. Thank you for having me. We are in kind of 3 different time zones. My name is Ruiz Ouyang, and I'm now doing my internship at the United Nations, Geneva. I'm extremely honored to have been selected for this fellowship, and I want to extend my most sincere gratitude to dear Mr. and Mrs. Berger, and the foundation at my university, and all of you who have made this happen. Last year, I was a volunteer at the opening ceremony of this fellowship. At the moment, I'm presented here as a scholarship recipient. I believe I have witnessed how the fellowship was created and all of the inspiration behind it, and how we move forward during the pandemic. It's full of changes and a shockingly significant year if we look back. What remains unchanged is our friendship and our endless efforts and contributions to China-US bilateral relations. And of course, my essay is a part of this, and which is landing on the biosafety issues in the bilateral relations, which is a key emergent field around the world. So next, please. So in my first section, I will briefly introduce the concept of biosafety. We don't have a unified definition of it right now because World Health Organization, Biological Weapon Convention, and National Department of Countries have its own understanding in a narrow sense, such as laboratory, technical, and military. So my essay is standing on a broader level, next please, which indicates the biosafety, that is a secure status for all living things on the earth, including human beings and animals and any kind of any form of lives. And we can see some pictures in a row. Let's see, next. SARS, next. The COVID-19, next. And the gene editing, next. And the anthrax bioterrorism, next. And biochemical weapons, next. That all is to the issue of biosafety, next. Yeah, then this is my first part of introduction in my essay, which I've already done. Next. Next. And then why did this issue came to become a problem? I think there's 4 fields of it. Like, I guess it is recognized as earlier there's a human activity, that is a human nature in biological principle. And it's no longer just a laboratory issue or just technical issue, because this issue is actually penetrated in every field of human society with a high-speed connectivity. That's why we could see from how many cases of the COVID-19 being tested all over the world, and that's the high speed of connectivity of the whole world. And that is very urgent issue, and we need to address this issue in a global level. Next. In my next section, I'm gonna address on the biosafety issue in this bilateral relationship. Next. Currently, both China and the US are highly focused on biosafety. The United States have been paying attention to biosafety problems since the last century, 70s, and they're focusing on preventing biological threats. After the anthrax bioterrorism attack happened in 2001, the US attention to biosafety has climbed to an extremely high level. Until now, I believe the US have been made systematic, comprehensive, and overall biosafety system and plan layout. So at the beginning of this year, the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak warned China and also the rest of the world that there is a shortage in national safety area of this biosafety. That's why each country needs to accept biosafety and put it into the national safety system as soon as possible to rapidly improve national safety management and governance. Here is the form that I've been done and research for the strategic comparison between the US and the China. There are 5 fields of them: legislation and policy, military defense, scientific research and technology, medical and health, economic, and society. Next, please. Next, please. In the next section, I did analysis of the impact on the China-US relations. Of course, there's an active relation. If we didn't address this issue very properly, there will be absence of communication, mistrust, military deception, public opinion warfare, and a fight against the agenda setting in the international level. But also we could see there's a lot of windows for opportunity that we can landed on cooperation and coordination on this issue, like medical research, ecological protection, and the security, military, and all kinds of fields that we can have cooperation. Next, please. That's why we came to the next section. In the global biosafety governance, how can US and China become to the leadership as a leader role and leading the cooperation in the world, because the biosafety is a quite key emerging issue and the global participation is not that deep. So that's why my current essay is focusing on how to strengthen and deepen the US-China relationship and leadership in global governance on this issue. And up to now, I have done like 14 pages as my first draft of this essay, and I believe I could do more to strengthen my future research with the guidance of and suggestion of our ambassadors and the professors today, and in the near future, we believe we could have more communication on that. And last, on behalf of all recipients, I would like to express our thanks to Mr. and Mrs. Berger, Ambassador Zhang, Ambassador Roy, Professor Taro, Professor Wang, Professor Jia, Professor Shi, and all of you who have made efforts to this fellowship. Standing at the corner of Mid-Autumn Festival and National Holiday, I wish all of you a happy, healthy October and a year ahead. Thank you. I will give my floor to Professor Wang.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ouyang. You actually, I think, pick up cutting edge issue in US-China relations, which actually has been understudied in the literature. So I think you got a great potential here going forward. I do look forward to reading your paper. And also, please do take good care of yourself since you are, in Geneva. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next, I would like to invite. It is my honor to invite Professor Shi Yinhong, distinguished professor of and chairman of academic committee of School of International Studies and director of the Center on American Studies at Renmin University of China. Professor Shi, please, Shi Lao Shi.
Thank you very much, Professor Wang Dong, and it's my great honor and a great pleasure to be here and to join with American scholars and Beida and colleagues to have this very significant and promoting and a project, and especially for encourage and young scholars, and which is our hope for our further research and even broader in bilateral relations. And also I would like to pay my great respect and to Madame Susan Berger, and also to Ambassador and Julia Chang, and also to my many years and respectful friend and Professor Loyal, and to all of you, and especially my respective respectful college in Beijing University. I think that I would very much would like to make a critical review of excellent paper by safety issues in Sino-American relations. And I believe the well-documented and well-structured essay presented by a talented and very promising young scholar really finds and covers a vitally important and highly uncertain issue area, biosafety, which has begun to impact and will continue to impact in an increasing degree on national security of both China and the United States, and the global security of the world all around. And indeed, as the essay emphasizes, from the beginning, from SARS to COVID-19, from gene editing to synthetic biology, from bioterrorist attack to biochemical weapons, there seems a large number of biosafety threats, traditional or new, are emerging one after another. Undoubtedly, biosafety has become a key emerging field and open governance space in the bilateral relations between China and the United States. And also, it's highly appreciable that the essay, having found such a vitally important topic, which needs to be explored further as imperative than the existing studies have done, probes into several major dimensions of the topic, does some innovative or even path-breaking work, enriches remarkably understanding of the issue area, and from a perspective of what ought to be talks a lot about the idealistic requirement of so-called opening space of cooperative governance in the bilateral relations between Beijing and Washington, and therefore even in imaginable global multilateral framework. So anyway, especially taking into account of the youngness of the scholar, it's really a very remarkable achievement, and also proves the high quality of an international school and Beijing University itself. However, and surprisingly, the dramatically intensifying strategic competition, or rather newly comprehensive rivalry, confrontation, and mutual condemnation, which are emphasized at the beginning of the essay, seems to be forgotten, I'm sorry to say, throughout the rest of the analysis. The vital issue of realistic feasibility, in my view, has not been substantially touched, together with the complex mechanism of the interaction between what it is and what ought to be, as well as the practical issue of how to strive to do, and of course, step by step, what ought to be in the planned worst situation of China-US relations since 1972. Now, I would like to focus on that issue of how to strive to do step by step what ought to be, or more accurately, what ought to do as the first step in the planned dangerous situation. In despite of the certain foreign tone of the war of words and ambiguous positive suggestion of the bilateral dialogue in the lunar statement by the Chinese high officials, I still believe that nothing substantial will thereby happen, at least in the next several months. The problem is on both sides. though more on part of Trump administration. Up to now, either side has strongly condemned the other from their respective totally opposite official position and so-called moral vantage point, demanded a wide range or even comprehensive major concessions only from the other, and had a discourse full of generalized principles, pompous rhetoric, and national co-interests and dignity, and which should to be clarified and limitedly defined in the first place. The Trump administration declares its objective as subversion and elimination of communist power in China. While the Chinese government talks about everything without realistically focusing on one or two major confrontational issues, which and only which could have some hope to be adversely mitigated in the best possible situation and the shortest possible time span. I believe nothing substantial will happen in at least the next few months to help to reverse the further deterioration of the bilateral relations. For substantial things happen to help to improve the situation, a fundamental different approach, I believe, as follows, has to be taken. Having set the avoidance of military conflict between China and the United States as a single common highest national interest, the single minimum common denominator, and only dominating topic, I believe both sides engage in a realistic, focusing dialogue or negotiation with concrete important offers from one or both sides. Offers taken as what to be seriously negotiated for significant trade-off aimed at obviously mitigate the situation and help to progress to a better place. John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev in 1962 shall be learned at present 2021. In other words, how to mitigate an increasingly dangerous situation of more possible clash between the two opposite strategic frontiers. How to accomplish this as the first step for other imperative things, including deal with biosafety, and which the author of our essay have so brilliantly pointed out as so imperative. I believe that at the present, only the Chinese side could and therefore should suggest in a sufficiently focused, realistic, and concrete way, and waiting for a new American administration to respond practically sooner or later. 6 months later, 1 year later, 2 years later, or 3 years later. First, I suggest as a starting point of concrete and the starting point of negotiation, a temporary military disengagement in South China Sea, no military geo there, suspension of freedom of navigation operations, and on Chinese side, demilitarization of the reclaimed areas, all for a period of 1 or hope for 2 years. Second, a temporary military de-escalation of the major measures over Taiwan, suspension of US armed sales and related training, perhaps together with suspension of escalation of diplomatic support for Taiwan, along with a substantial reduction of Chinese missile deployment targeting Taiwan and mitigating of military drills on both sides across strait. Third, starting arms control dialogue between Washington and Beijing, especially for the possibility of a substantial reduction for a period of 1 or 2 years of first, China's land-based conventional strategic missiles and the massive warship building. Second, on American and its allies side, United States and Japan suspicion of the US and Japan missile defense system, as well as their massive F-35 fighter deployments. Fourth, and this is already discussed by many scholars within and outside China, that is regularization of China-US meal-to-meal communication for crisis prevention and crisis management, making it sufficiently all-weather, sufficiently frequent, and sufficiently higher levels. Repeat, for substantial things happen to help to improve the situation, a fundamental different approach has to be taken, an approach featured by realistic expectation, focused negotiation, and concrete offers as conditions for multiple major compromises. This is the first major step for other imperative things, including dealing with biosafety. We have to do, the focused work in a very short time span for the most important. Then we can talk about other great things. So finally, I very much congratulated the very talented essay written by Mr. O Yang. And also I listened to other essays. I still think that Beida is very powerful to produce such a promising young scholars. But one thing is still left to be desired. And up to now, all I listen to the young scholars' essay producing Beida and School of International Relations in all of the essays talk so much about what ought to be, but this is not the most important. What it is, what is feasible, what is urgent and to do to deal with for as an imperative for better future, or more realistically, to see that for a less dangerous future is a very urgent task faced by the United States and China. God never gave anyone sufficient time. If we not do it in time way, then I don't think that all of your young guys talk about what to be will really have substantial hope to be a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, professors. I just this is my observation. Actually, three distinguished professors discussant. It seems to me they do have three very different, very unique, different way of commenting on the presentations. Professor Wang, his comments sound like a memoir, and Professor Sonnenschein's comments sounds like a conversation with Shuaiyu. And the professor's comments more like a long treatise. It's a very, outstanding academic paper that you have to read very carefully and try to incorporate into your next phase of writing. I think professors has also putting up a lot of hope and also demand on the younger generation of scholars. I will say myself included. So thank you so much, professors. Before I move to our next presenter, I just wanted to mention that our dear mutual friend, Bob Cap, has been also making very kind comments, very warm encouragement to our fellows. And Bob is an advisor to the U.S.-China Education Trust, and formerly he was president of U.S.-China Business Council. So thank you so much. Thank you, Bob. Last but not least, I would like to invite Zhang Chengyang to make his presentation. Chengyang, please.
Thank you, Professor Wang. Okay, I feel really honored to be given the opportunity of giving my presentation today, and I'm also looking forward to having a good communication with our honorable guests and professionals. As the only undergraduate here, I hope someday I can make my own contributions to the promotion of U.S.-China relations in the future. So next page, please. So my presentation today will focus on explaining a certain type of state behavior, self-assertion, and my presentation will include basically 4 parts here. Next, please. Well, as I mentioned in my application essay for this scholarship, I'm very interested in the so-called regional implications of the US-China competition. And I believe the US-China relationship is not only a critical issue, but also a ubiquitous context of almost all global affairs. I have been increasingly aware of this point over my past research experiences in Britain's and China's foreign policy during the Cold War, contemporary European Union's common security and foreign policies, and so on. However, in this paper, I'm trying to explore and theorize an underlying but coherent pattern of state behavior in the context of US-China bipolarity beyond those separate cases. The state behavior that I'm concerned with is so-called self-assertion. Self-assertion is a state claiming to gain more power in the international system, such as North Korea's nuclear development projects, etc. And self-assertion is quite commonplace in the world politics, but it's somehow counterintuitive for so-called secondary powers to do so. Secondary powers are great powers, whether sovereign states or supranational coalitions that are just inferior to superpowers, but superior to the rest of countries in the bipolar system. Next, please. Here are some typical cases of self-assertion by secondary powers. The first is Britain in the late 1940s, who tried to build a third global power based on Western Europe Union to form an equilibrium vis-a-vis Washington and Moscow. And the second example is China in the 1960s during the Great Cultural Revolution, which was claiming to counterbalance both United States and Soviet Union simultaneously. And the third and current example is European Union's nowadays is emphasizing the necessity of building so-called European sovereignty or strategic autonomy amid the US-China bipolarity. It's quite counterintuitive for secondary powers to be self-assertive because it's too risky, unfeasible, and unnecessary. But such phenomena does happen again and again over the history. Next, please. Therefore, I delve into those intriguing cases and make 2 hypotheses by borrowing insights from the structural realism and the new classical realism. I suppose a secondary power's self-assertion is related to, first, the so-called structural rigidity of the bipolar system, and second, the demands of internal mobilization by this secondary power. Structural rigidity defines how fierce the competition between 2 superpowers is. Higher structural rigidity will hinder secondary powers' potential self-assertion in incentives. In comparison, urgent demands of internal mobilization encourage such behavior because in that case, the government of secondary power will tend to rebuild its authority domestically by resorting to assertive foreign policies. Next, please. I draw some empirical cases to support my argument. Although we only have 2 bipolar systems in the modern history, one is the US-Soviet Union and another is the US-China, but we can subdivide them into 5 periods by so-called structural rigidity. Among them, in the first, third, and the fifth period, the bipolar system is less rigid, that permits potential self-assertion by secondary powers, while in the second and fourth periods, the bipolar system is constrained for this behavior. Next, please. But the cases show that only Britain in the first period, China in the third period, and the European Union in the fifth period resort to self-assertion, but some contemporary secondary powers did not do so. So next, please. So combining both internal and external variables, we can have the answers. According to the findings of this paper, only the secondary powers that are internally motivated but not externally constrained can be self-assertive, just like the case of Britain, China, and the European Union I had mentioned before. In other cases, the absence of any of those two conditions will incur no self-assertion cases. For example, even though the bipolar system is not rigid, some great powers are still reluctant or indifferent to self-assertion, such as the European powers during the détente period in the Cold War and the Russia in the past several years amid US-China bipolarity. Next, please. So in conclusion, this paper tries to explain the internal origins and external conditions of self-assertion by secondary powers within a bipolar system. In terms of theoretical implications, I hope my analysis can better our understanding of a certain state behavior. This paper also wants to show that how domestic dynamics may affect or distort great powers' reactions to the international structure. And the more important implications are concerned with the real war. According to the theory above, we can expect that if the US-China strategic competition continue to be manageable, all their relationship can be defined as so-called co-optation, 竞合关系, mentioned by some Chinese scholars. In this case, European Union's campaign for European sovereignty will be likely to continue. And for the case of Russia, considering nowadays its domestic politics is getting more unstable, so the Kremlin is likely to adopt more self-assertive foreign policy driven by its desire to rebuild domestic authority. But in another scenario, if the tensions between Washington and Beijing spiral out of control and two superpowers are stuck into a severe standstill, the bilateral system will be so rigid that Russia and the European Union have to choose other traditional foreign policies rather than self-assertion. Next, please. Yeah, please switch to the end. So basically, that's the end of my presentation. Really, thank you for your time and patience. And I'm looking forward to the comments from Ambassador Roy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chen Yang. I think this is an excellent presentation. Also, I think this is a very ambitious project you're working on. And I do hope, I think you probably wanted to clarify a little bit more about how do you distinguish between self-assertion, is the key concept of your work, vis-a-vis other concepts such as assertiveness, which is sort of more common in international politics. So I'll just stop here. Next, it is my honor to invite Ambassador Stapleton Roy, who is distinguished scholar and the founding director of the Wilson Center's Kissinger Institute on China in the United States, and formerly U.S. Ambassador to China. Ambassador Roy, please.
First, let me express my thanks to the organizers for putting together this very fascinating manner of honoring the 4 awardees. I must say that Sandy Berger was the kind of national security advisor that every American ambassador dreams of having in Washington during their ambassadorships. I was ambassador to China and to Indonesia during the Clinton administration, and I benefited greatly from having Sandy Berger in Washington. He made my job much easier. I also congratulate Mr. Zhang Chengyang for writing a fascinating paper on understanding self-assertion by secondary powers within a bipolar international system. A key premise of his essay, as you now know, is that a state will resort will resort to self-assertive behavior only when the structural rigidity of the given bipolar system is low and the state has considerable demand for internal mobilization. He uses as examples British behavior in the 1940s, China in the 1960s, and the European Union at present. Mr. Zhang's paper is particularly important because it seeks to shed light on issues that are directly relevant to the current emerging bipolarity between the United States and China. There is unquestioned value in better understanding the structural aspects of the international system that may, to a greater or lesser degree, be decisive in shaping the behavior of major countries who retain considerable autonomy of action within an increasingly bipolar distribution of military, economic, and political power. But my viewpoints are influenced by the fact I'm the only non-professor among the commentators. My university training was in history, not in political science, and my career was as a practicing diplomat, not as an academician, with over 20 years spent working on US relations with the Soviet Union and China. So in other words, I was dealing with the big actors of the world in my diplomatic career, and also had some experience with secondary powers, if you will. But diplomacy is aimed at influencing the behavior of other countries. We don't care about structural factors. We want the countries to adopt decisions that are compatible with our interests. And so we tend to focus on leadership rather than on structural considerations. To influence a country's behavior, you need to influence the top leaders. And one of the curious reasons why some democratic leaders actually like authoritarian leaders is because authoritarian leaders, if you can get them to agree to something, are more effective in implementing what they have agreed to. For example, in Indonesia, if you could get Suharto to approve something, you could get it done. But after Suharto, the government might agree to something and they wouldn't be able to implement it because their democratic system made it difficult to carry out the obligations that the leaders had taken on themselves. And you will find, the United States is a good example, the democratic countries often are unreliable in carrying out decisions made by their leaders, because without the domestic support in the country to carry out those decisions, they have difficulty implementing them. So my first comment is we have to somehow work leadership into the question. As an American, this is particularly relevant at present because under President Trump, the United States is behaving in ways that don't fit with any theories of international behavior by major powers. In fact, I think you will find that perhaps the study of psychiatry is a better guide to US international behavior at the present time than political science can provide. So we Americans are baffled by the fact that we are acting in so many ways that seem to many of us observers as contrary to American interests. We're weakening our alliances. We are behaving erratically. And the question is, how does that affect the international system? And this is an interesting way of trying to understand the contributions of political science to understanding international behavior, but perhaps we need something more than that in order to have a better grasp of international behavior. I have been thinking about examples in the 20th century of where leaders made the big difference, not the characteristics of the international system. For example, Lenin taking Russia out of the First World War in 1917. That was the decision that other Russian leaders would not have made at that time. It was the nature of Lenin that produced that decision, and it altered the course of World War I. Hitler, in leading Germany onto a disastrous course after World War I, that most people thought was incompatible with historic German culture, that a leader such as Hitler could gain such a grip on his country. And yet he did, and against the better judgment of many of his generals and others, he led Germany on a path that was disastrous from the standpoint of the country. Or Churchill, in stubbornly refusing to submit to overwhelming Nazi military power. If Hitler had gained control of the British Isles and the Japanese had attacked the United States, we would have focused on the war in the Pacific because we would not have had a platform on which we could mount a counterattack to the Nazis in Europe. And that would have changed the whole course of World War II. So the fact that Britain had a leader like Churchill was really a fundamentally important factor. The same thing can be said about Chairman Mao's decision to intervene in Korea during the Korean War. He had unanimous opposition from his generals to his desire to introduce Chinese volunteers into the war. He had to bring Peng Dehuai in from his northwestern position in order to turn attitudes around in the key leadership decisions. And our intelligence under General MacArthur in Korea came to the wrong conclusion. It was the right conclusion from the standpoint of political science factors, because China was weak, the United States, it had no Navy, it had no Air Force. For it to intervene in Korea was guaranteed to have very negative consequences, but Chairman Mao thought it was necessary to do, and it altered the whole course of history after the Korean War. You could say the same thing about de Gaulle's decision to take France out of NATO's integrated military command in 1957, to the intense exasperation of the United States. I had just joined the Foreign Service at that time, and I can remember how angry American leaders were over this French behavior, because it seemed to make no sense to them. And yet that's the way that France was behaving. And last but not least, of course, is the decision by Chairman Mao and President Nixon to reshape the direction of US-China relations. In looking back at that period, I find it highly doubtful that any other American political leader could have made the decision that President Nixon made, that he was willing to go to Beijing in order to demonstrate US sincerity. If he had decided to send the Secretary of State or a Vice President, Chairman Mao would not have trusted him. It was the willingness of the president to himself go to Beijing that produced an enormous turnaround in the international situation. So leadership is somehow an important factor that we have to work into our thinking about the structural factors. And because of this, because diplomats and historians tend to think differently from political scientists, I went back and reread an essay that Dr. Henry Kissinger published in 1968, before he became the National Security Advisor to President Nixon. And it's a fascinating essay. It was titled Central Issues of American Foreign Policy. And it focused on the problems of military bipolarity in a multipolar world. So in other words, in some ways, he was looking at the same issue that Mr. Zhang is looking at in his paper, but Dr. Kissinger at that time did not yet have his experience as a national security advisor, but he had been giving a lot of thought to international relations and nuclear weapons issues and other questions like that. And the remarkable thing about that essay, written over 50 years ago, is it's very relevant to the current military bipolarity that's emerging between the United States and China, because it really is a multipolar political system we see in the world, because the secondary powers are really not under the control of the superpowers. And therefore, there is a dynamic that is relevant. But of course, Dr. Kissinger was looking at US-Soviet bipolarity, and now the bipolarity is between the United States and China. But Dr. Kissinger also looked at structural questions. And this is where his essay makes Mr. Zhang's essay particularly fascinating, to compare the way that they were looking at these questions. For example, Dr. Kissinger viewed military bipolarity as a source of rigidity in foreign policy. And this parallels Mr. Zhang's finding that it's the structural rigidity of the bipolar system that determines whether the self-assertion by a secondary power can be transformed from motivations into actions. Interestingly, Dr. Kissinger viewed military bipolarity as Dr. Kissinger felt that military bipolarity actually encouraged political multipolarity, suggesting by extension that we might see more assertive behavior by countries such as Japan, Russia, India, Turkey, and Brazil, countries that are the secondary powers in their respective regions. But this makes a certain amount of sense, because we shouldn't look at end states. The reality is that secondary powers do not want rigid bipolarity to emerge. And so therefore they become more assertive because of a tendency of bipolarity to become more rigid. And the secondary countries don't want that to happen. We can see this, for example, in the United States behavior at the present time. We are trying to tighten bipolarity in Asia by asking our friends and allies in Asia to choose us over China. And our friends and allies don't want to do that. So they are pushing back against the United States. And that's one of the problems in US foreign policy at the moment. That because our domestic factors are driving our foreign policy, instead of looking at Asia and understanding the interplay of forces in Asia, so our foreign policy is actually being opposed by our friends and allies in Asia because they do not want to have rigid bipolarity emerge. They want to retain their relations with China, and at the same time to have the United States present in the Western Pacific so that China doesn't abuse its rising power and become a bully or more assertive there. So in some ways, this is an insight that emerges from Mr. Zhang's essay, which is it's a tendency toward rigidity and bipolarity that causes the secondary powers to become more assertive. And that's something that US policy hasn't fully understood. And therefore, I hope that Mr. Zhang's ideas can get some attention among people who pay attention to this. So I congratulate Mr. Zhang on a very stimulating paper, which is highly relevant to what's going on in the world today.
Hello. Yes. Hi. Thank you, Ambassador Roy, for your fascinating comments, and also for reminding us the limitations in political science and IR theory and the importance of history. I think that was a very fascinating comment. Thank you so much, Ambassador Roy. Now, we've had 4 excellent presentations by our 4 recipients of the Sandy Berger Memorial Fellowship, and also the comments made by full of insight and wisdom made by 4 distinguished discussants. Now, I would like to turn over to my colleague, Professor Qi Haotian, to moderate the closing ceremony. Haotian, please.
Thank you, Professor Wang. Thank every Berger Fellowship recipient for your excellent presentations. And thank Professor Wang Jisi, Professor Sunnyshine, Professor Shi, and Ambassador Roy for a very insightful, important comments. Now it's my great honor to invite Professor Jia Qingguo, the Director of the Institute for Global Cooperation and understanding of Peking University to give closing remarks. 贾老师，请。
Oh, thank you. Mrs. Berger, Ambassador Block, and my good friends and colleagues and excellent students. Today we gather here to mark the ceremony to award the Sandy Berger Memorial Fellowship to 4 outstanding students. I also wish to take this opportunity to congratulate the 4 students for their excellent academic achievement. Just now we heard their presentations and professors' comments. Both are excellent and thought-provoking. I like particularly State Ambassador Roy's comments on the relationship between the structural factors and the individual's roles, roles of the individual leaders in shaping history. It's a topic of constant reflection on the part of the academic and probably also professional community. This event takes place at a time when relations between our 2 countries are in difficult times. Recently, we hear all kinds of accusations and allegations. We're told that our 2 countries are enemies. We're told that the other country has been ripping us off. We are told that the other country is bent on foreign aggression. We are told that people of the other countries are potential spies. Therefore, they say we need to decouple our economies and de-link our ties. The fact is that the allegations and accusations are false. China and the US are not enemies. Both countries have benefited tremendously from their economic relationship over the past decades. Neither country is bent on military aggression, except for very few people traveling across the Pacific between the 2 countries are not spies. However, falsehood and misinformation appear to have the upper hand for the time being. The outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic has made it even worse. Against this background, the once robust people-to-people exchange between the 2 countries, which was endorsed and encouraged by governments of both countries, is at risk. It is really heartbreaking to see the relationship of the 2 countries unraveling and heading for confrontation. China and the US are great countries. China-US relationship is of critical importance to people and of the 2 countries and for the world. There are 1,000 reasons to make it work. As responsible citizens, we should make our efforts to make it work. Many years ago, the then National Security Advisor, His Honorable Samuel Berger, said that the United States has a tremendous stake in how China evolves and should encourage China to define its future within the international community, not outside it. China also has such a tremendous stake in this regard. One way for China and the US to work out their relationship is to encourage people-to-people exchange. Only through constant contact between our 2 peoples can we appreciate each other's concerns and aspirations objectively and formulate appropriate policies on that basis. Only through constant contact between our 2 peoples can we find ways to live peacefully and prosper from the relationship. As a born optimist, I believe that through the hard work of like-minded people like us, the relationship between our 2 countries will be back on track eventually, despite the current setbacks. In the light of this, my institute is particularly honored to work with the U.S.-China Education Trust to set up and manage the Samuel Berger Memorial Fellowship. I wish to take this opportunity to thank the Berger family for their kind and generous support. Thank the perseverance, Ambassador Block for her perseverance in promoting China-US people-to-people exchange. Thank the distinguished Chinese and American friends for their valuable support and participation in this event. And thank our outstanding students for their study on US-China and on the US and China-US relations. And last but not the least, thank the staff of both sides whose devoted efforts have made this event possible and successful. Wish everybody present good health and our two great countries live in peace and prosperity. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Jia, for your insightful and encouraging remarks. Once again, congratulations to all the recipients of Sandy Berger Memorial Fellowship. As Mrs. Berger put it, you are carrying a torch. And as Ambassador Chang Block emphasized, we need more young talents to understand both countries well. So I wish you all good luck and great success in your future explorations, especially with the support of Berger Fellowship. And with that, I announce the closing of Sandy Berger Memorial Fellowship Awards ceremony. Wish Mrs. Berger, Berger family, and all distinguished guests good health and happiness. Thank you all.